It was a typical Monday morning, the kind that feels ordinary until something breaks that illusion in an instant. I had dropped my daughter off at school and lingered a little longer than usual, watching the playground fill with children laughing, running, and chasing one another in a chaotic ballet of energy. The sun was bright, the air crisp, yet beneath the veneer of normalcy, something tugged at the edge of my awareness. That's when I saw them. Two girls, no older than 10, huddled near the back of the playground, faces flushed, shoulders hunched as other children circled them. The first blow was verbal. Sneers, mocking laughter, cruel words tossed like stones. I could see the girls' hands trembling, gripping the straps of their backpacks as if holding on to something tangible could anchor them against the humiliation. My stomach tightened, my chest constricted, and a cold fire ignited inside me. I knew that look. That fear, that hopelessness. And then it hit me, harder than anything else in that moment. Their faces. Those faces. The girls, the exact same girls I had pulled from rubble a decade ago, in the heart of a war-torn city where bullets were as common as dust. My hands, which had once steadied them in terror, clenched in disbelief. Could it really be them? Time had changed them, shaped them, but the essence remained, the same wide, terrified eyes, the same trembling hands. The playground noise faded into a blur, replaced by the vivid, haunting memories of that mission. I remembered the chaos, the shrieks of the dying, the acrid smoke, the heat of the sun turned oppressive by dust and fire. I had been part of a small squad, tasked with evacuating civilians caught in crossfire. When I first saw them, two tiny girls, no older than these, they were trapped beneath collapsed beams, their bodies shaking, mouths silent except for whimpers of fear. I had lifted them into my arms without hesitation, the world narrowing to the singular goal of keeping them alive. And now here they were, in a school playground, under attack again, though this time by their peers instead of gunfire. The scene was mundane, yet its impact was terrifyingly similar. Helplessness. Vulnerability. The same desperate need for protection I had once provided in the middle of a battlefield. Only now, I was not dressed in tactical gear, armed to defend them. I was a bystander, a mother trying to keep her composure as my past collided with my present. A group of older children had surrounded them, laughing cruelly, shoving the girls lightly at first, then with a force that made my heart clench. The sound of laughter, the way the world seemed to mock their fragility, ignited something primal inside me. I felt that familiar surge, the one I had known in combat, the refusal to allow harm to continue when I could intervene. Yet, in this environment, the rules were different. I could not pull a weapon or issue commands. I had to navigate the battlefield of schoolyard politics, of authority and decorum, without exposing my identity, without alarming the staff, without overstepping boundaries in a world I had not trained for. And then, one of the bullies reached too far, and the girls tumbled. One of them, a girl whose laugh I remembered vividly from the mission, a sound fragile but defiant, hit the ground, scraping her knee. The laugh, muffled by shock and pain, resonated in my mind, and for a moment I was transported back to that day in the rubble, when I had held them close and whispered promises that someone would fight for them, that they would not be abandoned. My chest tightened, a mixture of guilt, rage, and sorrow. How had I failed them again? For years, I had wondered if they had found safety, family, happiness. And now I realized that their struggles were far from over, that the world, even in its mundane forms, could still inflict pain and fear on them. My mind raced. Should I intervene directly? Should I speak to the teachers? Could I risk revealing who I was, risking a lifetime of security they might have found? I approached them cautiously, keeping my distance at first, pretending to be a passerby while my gaze never left their faces. The girls looked up briefly, confusion flickering across their features. Recognition? No, not yet. They were cautious, defensive, conditioned by experience to expect hostility. My heart ached for them, for the years they had endured without my guidance, without my protection. 10 years had passed, and in a way, I had been absent, not by choice but by circumstance. And now I was faced with the painful reminder that childhood scars do not heal automatically, and trauma has a way of echoing across time. I stayed long enough to see the bullies retreat, driven off by a teacher's arrival, and the girls were left trembling, their hands clutching each other, silent in their relief. I exhaled, a shudder passing through me, realizing that in this small moment, the mission was not yet over. My instinct to protect, to guide, to reassure, had not faded. And though I could not yet reveal myself fully, I knew that I had to find a way to be present in their lives, to become their shield again, in whatever form the modern world allowed. As they walked away, I caught one last glance at the familiar face, the same one that had laughed despite fear a decade ago. That laugh, the laugh I had promised to protect, to honor, to never forget, resonated deep within me. It was a call, a reminder, a tether between the past and the present. And in that moment, I made a silent vow. I would not let them face the world alone again. For the first time in years, the line between my past as a soldier and my present as a mother and protector blurred. The mission was far from over. And as I followed at a distance, careful to remain unseen, I realized that the journey to reclaim my role in their lives, to protect them once more, had begun. The memory of that mission is etched into my mind with painful clarity. It was a day that blurred the line between life and death, a day that demanded every ounce of focus, courage, and instinct I had honed in years of military service. Even now, years later, the details remain as vivid as if they were unfolding before me in real time. The dust, the smoke, the distant echoes of chaos, and the faces of the two girls I saved. We were deployed on a mission in a city caught in the crossfire of relentless violence. Intelligence had reported a group of civilians trapped in a collapsing structure, unable to escape due to debris and heavy gunfire nearby. The team moved quickly, methodically, every sense on high alert. But nothing could prepare me for what I would find inside that crumbling building. As we approached, I saw them. Two small figures, huddled together beneath a beam that threatened to give way at any moment. Their clothes were tattered, their faces streaked with dust and tears, and their bodies trembled in the aftermath of explosions and fear. One of the girls, her hair matted with dirt, her eyes wide with terror, let out a small laugh when she saw me, as if trying to convince herself that this stranger was safe. I recognized that laugh immediately. It was a brave, defiant sound that clung stubbornly to life despite every reason to surrender to despair. I remember the rush of adrenaline as I moved toward them, the weight of my weapon a distant concern compared to the urgency of holding them in my arms. "It's okay, I've got you," I whispered, my voice steady despite the chaos around us. I could feel their tiny hands clutching my uniform, their desperation pressing against my chest as if I were their only lifeline. And in that moment, the world outside, gunfire, smoke, explosions, ceased to exist. All that mattered was keeping them alive. The extraction was brutal. Every step carried the risk of collapse, every sound threatened to reveal our position to hostile forces. I remember the beam shifting beneath them, the girls' muffled screams as I pulled them free, my own body straining against the weight of fear, urgency, and hope. I had carried many in my career, soldiers, civilians, those caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But there was something about these girls, something about their fragile resilience, that anchored me, that demanded I push beyond exhaustion and danger. Once we were clear of immediate danger, the girls clung to me, trembling, but alive. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with guilt, the kind that never fully leaves you when you survive while so much else remains broken. I had saved their bodies, yes, but the trauma, the memories of terror, would linger far beyond the rubble and fire. I knew that, and I knew that our connection, however brief, would leave a mark on both them and me. Back at base, we debriefed. The girls were placed with temporary care, and I stayed longer than necessary, ensuring they were comfortable, that their immediate fears were soothed, and that they knew someone would protect them. Their laughter returned in small bursts, hesitant, shaky, but genuine. And every time I heard it, it was a reminder of why I had joined the service, why I had endured hardship, why I had faced danger without flinching. Yet, even then, I could not know what the future would hold for them. Orders, missions, and the realities of military life demanded that I move on, leaving them in hands that could care for them but could not recreate the bond we had formed in those perilous moments. I left with the knowledge that I had given them a chance at life, a chance at hope, but also with the ache of absence, the silent fear that life would continue to challenge them in ways I could not predict. Years passed. I thought of them often, wondering where they were, whether they were safe, whether the laughter I remembered still existed in their hearts. I never imagined that the world would bring us back together in such an ordinary yet extraordinary setting. A school playground, far from war zones, far from explosions and gunfire, yet echoing the same themes of vulnerability, courage, and resilience. The memory of the mission is intertwined with the memory of their faces. The wide, trusting eyes, the fragile laughter, the tiny hands that had clung to me as if I were the only constant in a world gone mad. It is a memory that fuels me now, even as I watch them being bullied again, as I recognize the echoes of fear in their present circumstances. I remember every heartbeat of that day, every frantic decision, every moment when I chose courage over fear. And I realize, with a surge of both dread and determination, that the mission is not truly over. Because now, in this schoolyard, I am faced with the impossible challenge of protecting them again. Not from bullets, not from explosions, but from cruelty, ignorance, and indifference. The battlefield has changed, the enemies have changed, but the mission remains the same. To ensure their safety, to nurture their confidence, to preserve the fragile spark of life and hope that I first saw in their laughter so many years ago. I remind myself that courage does not belong solely to war zones, that heroism is not measured only by the ability to face physical danger. Sometimes, heroism is in the quiet moments of intervention, in the willingness to stand against cruelty, in the patience to guide, protect, and nurture lives that have already been shaped by trauma. And as I watch them now, huddled together against the onslaught of their peers, I feel that familiar surge, the one that had driven me through chaos and fire years ago. The mission is far from over. The girls' laughter, the same one that had clung to life amidst rubble and gunfire, is under threat again. And I am determined more than ever, that this time, I will not be absent. This time, I will fight to protect them, to stand as their shield, and to ensure that the world does not take from them what I risked everything to save once before. I couldn't believe my eyes. The more I watched those two girls, the same ones I had risked everything to save, they were trapped again, this time in a playground that was meant to be safe, a school that promised protection and guidance. My stomach twisted, my heart pounded, and an almost unbearable sense of humiliation clawed at me. How could I, a trained soldier who had faced death countless times, feel so powerless now? The older children circling them laughed cruelly, mimicking and exaggerating their every move. "Clumsy," one shouted. "You're so weird," another chimed in. The words hit like punches, each one sharper because they were invisible weapons that I couldn't deflect without revealing myself. My fists clenched instinctively, my mind whirling with all the drills, maneuvers, and strategies I had ever learned. But this battlefield was different. There were no clear rules, no uniformed authority, no immediate solution. Just the quiet helplessness of watching those familiar faces suffer once again. And then it hit me fully. These weren't just any children being bullied. These were the girls I had carried in my arms, the girls whose tiny hands had clung to me for protection, the girls whose laughter had cut through chaos and rubble years ago. Their faces, though slightly older, still carried that fragile resilience, the same spark of defiance that had shone in the middle of destruction. But here, the spark was flickering, threatened by a world that refused to pause for trauma or memory. I wanted to run to them, to shield them, to remove them from the scene entirely. But I hesitated, frozen by the awareness of my own identity in this setting. I couldn't simply reveal myself, couldn't break the social and administrative structures that governed a schoolyard with brute force. I had to navigate invisibly, carefully, strategically. And yet, every second I remained still, their humiliation deepened. The cruel laughter echoed in my ears, merging with the ghosts of gunfire and screams from the mission I had thought was behind me. "Stop it!" I wanted to scream. But my voice was swallowed by the noise, my authority meaningless in this new battlefield. My eyes tracked their movements. One girl crouched low, protecting her books and her dignity as best she could. The other tried to hide behind her friend, biting her lip to suppress a sob. It was all too familiar, the instinctive drive to survive, to shield oneself, to cling to another in desperation. I remembered lifting them out of rubble, whispering promises of safety. And now, here they were again, forced to endure pain and fear, and I felt like I had failed them once more. The emotional weight pressed down on me. Shame, guilt, helplessness, they all intertwined, forming a knot in my chest that I couldn't untangle. I had spent 10 years preparing, learning, surviving, and yet I was powerless in a playground. My mind flickered back to the mission, the debris, the smoke, the danger. There, my training had allowed me to act decisively. Here, my experience was irrelevant. Here, I was just another adult, watching, invisible, aching and frustrated. And then, something shifted. One of the girls, a girl whose laugh I remembered so clearly, looked up for a moment, and our eyes met. I don't know if she recognized me, if something in her memory clicked, or if it was just coincidence. But the connection was undeniable. In that instant, a flood of emotions surged. Recognition, disbelief, relief, and a sense of urgency unlike anything I had felt since the mission. My training and logic gave way to raw instinct. I had to act, somehow, without exposing myself completely. I moved closer, staying on the periphery, my gaze never leaving them. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the intensity of a decade of longing and worry that now collided with the immediacy of danger, albeit a different kind. The bullies continued, unaware of the silent observer in their midst, and I felt the familiar rush of protectiveness, the same one that had guided me through life-or-death decisions in war zones. Only now, the stakes were emotional, subtle, and deeply personal. The humiliation I felt was almost unbearable. I had imagined a world where my past heroism could provide some solace or reassurance. A world where the girls I saved would thrive without the shadows of fear lingering over them. Yet here I was, witnessing them being stripped of confidence and joy in an environment that was supposed to nurture them. I felt the sting of helplessness, compounded by the bitter realization that, despite all my past victories, life had placed me back in a position where I could only watch, and feel guilty for doing so. It was in that moment that I made a silent vow. I would not let this go. I would find a way to intervene, to reclaim my role in their lives, to ensure that they were protected, nurtured, and given the support they needed. The humiliation of my inaction could not stand. I refused to be powerless while the girls I had once saved were vulnerable again. When the teacher finally intervened, dispersing the bullies, I exhaled, but the relief was hollow. The girls huddled together, wary, their faces streaked with tears and dirt. I watched as they stood, fragile but resilient, and I realized that my connection to them had never truly ended. The mission may have concluded physically, but emotionally and spiritually, it had never been complete. And now, I understood that my next task was not in the battlefield rubble, but here, in the intricate, subtle, and sometimes cruel world of ordinary life. That day, as I walked away from the playground, I couldn't shake the images. The girls' fear, the bullies' laughter, the familiarity of their faces. I knew I had been called back into their lives for a reason, and the path forward would demand patience, courage, and ingenuity. The humiliation I felt was real, sharp, and necessary. It was a reminder that heroism was not always about decisive action or battlefield glory, but sometimes about persistence, vigilance, and the quiet determination to stand for those who cannot yet stand for themselves. The spark I had once protected, their fragile, defiant laughter, was still there, flickering against the shadows of cruelty. And I vowed silently and fiercely that I would reignite it, protect it, and ensure that it would never fade again. After that day on the playground, I couldn't stop thinking about them. The two girls, their trembling hands, the flicker of recognition in their eyes. It haunted me. I needed to know more. Who were they now? How had life treated them in the years since I'd carried them out of danger? The thought of leaving them to navigate the world alone again was unbearable. I realized that the mission wasn't over. The battlefield had changed, but the stakes were no less critical. I started cautiously. I spoke with their teachers under the pretense of a concerned parent, careful to keep my identity private. At first, the teachers painted a picture of ordinary struggles, kids teasing each other over differences in height, grades, or clothing. But the more I listened, the more I sensed a deeper story hidden beneath the surface. The girls were quiet, withdrawn, and sensitive in ways that most children aren't. One teacher even mentioned, almost in passing, that the girls sometimes spoke of fear, of things that happened long ago, though they never elaborated. Curiosity became urgency. I knew there was more. Trauma that had been silenced, scars that had never fully healed. I needed to understand their lives today, not just the lives I had touched a decade ago. So I arranged to volunteer at the school library, giving myself reasons to be near them, observe them, and learn without drawing suspicion. I watched as they navigated classrooms, hallways, and playgrounds, noticing the subtle ways they shielded themselves. They flinched at sudden loud noises, avoided large groups, and sometimes froze when someone raised a voice near them. My heart ached with recognition. These were the residual fears of children who had survived life-threatening danger, now attempting to survive a different kind of battle. One afternoon, I saw the smallest details that told the story they didn't voice. The way one girl hugged her books to her chest like a shield. The other, biting her lip until it bled slightly, a silent reminder of anxiety she couldn't articulate. They were surviving, yes, but not thriving. They were living cautiously, as if the world would hurt them if they let their guard down. And I felt the weight of responsibility. I had saved their lives once, but the life I had rescued them into was still imperfect. I began leaving small gifts, notebooks, colored pencils, notes of encouragement, anonymous gestures meant to remind them that someone was watching, someone cared. At first, they were wary, suspicion shadowing their faces as they accepted my offerings. But over time, I noticed small changes. One smile here, a fleeting glance there, tiny signs that they were beginning to trust, even just a little. It was progress, fragile and tentative, but real. And then came the revelation that shook me. One afternoon, as I walked into the library, the younger girl's eyes widened in recognition. Her voice trembled, barely audible. "I know you. You saved us, years ago." My chest tightened. Relief, fear, and disbelief collided within me. The bond one had feared lost had never truly disappeared. They remembered. They carried those moments, the whispered promises in the rubble, the sensation of safety in my arms, inside them all these years. And now, for the first time since that mission, they were ready to acknowledge it. The flood of emotions was overwhelming. Guilt and shame for being absent for so long, pride in seeing their resilience, and a renewed determination to protect them surged together. I realized that the mission, in essence, had never ended. Life had continued, challenges had evolved, but the duty I had accepted in that rubble remained. I had been entrusted with their safety once, and now, decades later, I had a chance to fulfill that commitment again. They began sharing fragments of their lives cautiously. The older girl, protective and stoic, spoke of foster homes, of teachers who had tried but failed to understand the depth of her fear. The younger one, more tentative, described nights of anxiety, of reliving moments of terror in dreams, of feeling different from other children in ways she couldn't explain. Every story cut deep into my heart, confirming what I had feared. The trauma I had glimpsed in their eyes on that playground was not a recent event. It was a continuation of scars left by the war, compounded by years of isolation and fear. I learned that the bullying was often rooted in misunderstandings of their past. Differences that others noticed, differences that were magnified by insecurity. They were not just quiet or odd. They were survivors of events most adults could not imagine. And in a world that rarely pauses to understand, their survival instincts had been mistaken for weakness, their caution for strangeness. The weight of the revelation made me furious, not at the girls, but at the system, at the world, at the careless cruelty of those who could not see past superficial judgments. But there was hope too. In their acknowledgement of me, in the cautious trust forming between us, I saw the possibility of rewriting their narrative. I realized that protection wasn't just about shielding them physically. It was about nurturing confidence, validating their experiences, and helping them reclaim agency over their own lives. The battlefield was no longer rubble-strewn streets or war zones. It was the classrooms, hallways, and social spaces where fear had taken root. And I knew, with unwavering certainty, that I would not leave them to fight alone this time. The girls began opening up gradually, sharing memories I had long held privately in my own mind. The night of the mission, the chaos, the fear, the moments when laughter had been their shield against despair. In those moments, our shared history became a bridge between past and present. I saw the resilience that had carried them this far, and I recognized the immense responsibility I had to ensure that resilience was honored, nurtured, and never broken again. That night, I reflected on the journey we had taken, one from chaos to tenuous safety, from survival to hidden struggles, from fear to a cautious openness. The revelation of their current lives, the truths they had hidden from the world, had shifted everything. The mission had evolved from rescue to redemption, from protection to mentorship, from heroism to responsibility. And I understood that the hardest battles were not fought in the heat of war, but in the quiet moments of trust, understanding, and emotional bravery. I made a promise to myself. I would stand with them, guide them, and protect them, not as a soldier with weapons, but as someone who had once been entrusted with their lives and now had the chance to nurture their spirits. The truth they had hidden was no longer a barrier. It was a call to action, a mission reborn in a world that demanded courage of a different kind. The realization that the girls were vulnerable once again transformed my anger and frustration into purpose. I had survived war zones, navigated missions under fire, and faced adversaries who wanted nothing more than to see lives extinguished. But this battlefield, a school playground, a classroom, a world that failed to recognize trauma, was different. The enemy was subtle. Ignorance, cruelty, and indifference. And yet, the mission remained the same. Protect, guide, and fight for those who could not fight for themselves. I began with observation. I noted the patterns. Which teachers were sympathetic, which administrators were reactive but ineffective, which children were instigators. Every detail mattered. Years of tactical training had honed my mind to analyze threats, anticipate movements, and strategize interventions. Here I had to apply the same principles, but with nuance. Every action had to be deliberate, subtle, and most importantly, supportive of the girls without putting them at further risk. I spoke privately with teachers, presenting myself as a concerned volunteer and mentor, careful to avoid revealing the depth of my personal connection. I shared insights about trauma, resilience, and how small gestures of guidance could dramatically change outcomes for children who had endured significant early life stress. Slowly, I began to build allies, teachers and staff willing to observe more closely, intervene sooner, and take bullying seriously. Each step was a quiet victory, a shift in the environment that would strengthen the girls' safety net. Next, I devised a plan for the girls themselves. Protection required more than outside intervention. It required empowerment. I met with them after school, gradually earning their trust, encouraging them to speak about their feelings, their fears, and even their memories of the past mission. At first, they were hesitant, suspicious of my presence, unsure if I could be trusted. I reminded myself that trust is built, not demanded. Every session was about patience, gentle encouragement, and creating a space where they could feel safe without fear of judgment. I also taught them subtle strategies, ways to navigate social pressures, ways to assert themselves without confrontation, ways to maintain confidence in the face of ridicule. These lessons weren't about discipline or authority. They were about reclaiming agency, reinforcing self-worth, and recognizing that their past experiences, which had made them survivors, were also a source of strength. I saw glimpses of pride and empowerment in their eyes, tiny victories that signaled progress and hope. But strategy alone was not enough. I had to confront the environment itself, the bullies, the dismissive bystanders, and the adults who underestimated the girls. I orchestrated small interventions, quietly redirecting bullies, ensuring teachers observed interactions more carefully, and creating situations where the girls could succeed socially and academically. Each act was a careful maneuver, a tactical adjustment designed to reclaim territory that had been taken from them by cruelty and neglect. One afternoon, the turning point arrived. The bullies cornered the girls again, but this time, the environment had shifted. A teacher intervened immediately, following my earlier suggestions, and the girls themselves stood taller, using the verbal and non-verbal strategies we had practiced. I watched from a distance, my heart swelling with relief and pride. It was a small victory, but a critical one. The message was clear: they were no longer powerless, and they had allies they could trust. The girls began to change. Confidence, once fragile and fleeting, started to grow. They smiled more openly, laughed more freely, and even took small risks socially, testing boundaries in ways that were previously unimaginable. I knew that the work was far from complete. The world could still be cruel, but the foundation had been laid. They now had tools, support, and the knowledge that someone cared enough to fight for them quietly, strategically, and consistently. Yet, the most profound shift came in our moments of reflection. I encouraged them to remember their past, the mission, the escape from danger, the moments of fear and laughter intertwined. We spoke about the bravery they had shown even as children, the resilience that had allowed them to survive trauma. By connecting their past strength to their present actions, I helped them see themselves not as victims but as warriors in their own right. It was an emotional breakthrough, one that bound us together even more tightly. I realized that protection was multifaceted. It wasn't just about shielding them from harm, it was about nurturing confidence, building resilience, fostering trust, and instilling the courage to navigate a world that had not always been kind. The battlefield had changed, but the essence of the mission remained. My training, experience, and instincts had prepared me for moments like this, even if the threats were no longer physical but emotional and psychological. As the weeks passed, the girls flourished. Small gestures became habits, small victories became confidence, and trust solidified into an unspoken bond. I was no longer just a bystander or a shadow in their lives. I had become a guide, a protector, and a mentor. And in this quiet but profound way, the reckoning I had anticipated, the confrontation with my guilt, my fears, and the past, began to resolve. At night, I reflected on the journey so far. From the rubble of a war-torn city to the tense dynamics of a school playground, the mission had evolved, yet remained profoundly the same: to protect, nurture, and honor those who could not protect themselves. The girls had endured, grown, and survived, and now, with guidance and care, they were beginning to reclaim the lives they deserved. I knew the path ahead would not always be smooth. Challenges, setbacks, and fears would surface again. But I also knew that the foundation we had built, trust, resilience, and empowerment, would allow us to face whatever came next. The mission had transformed from a desperate act of physical rescue into a sustained effort to shape lives, heal emotional wounds, and build a sense of security that had been absent for far too long. And as I watched the girls laugh, truly laugh without fear, without hesitation, I knew that our plan was working. We were no longer just surviving. We were reclaiming our lives, rewriting the story, and proving that courage, care, and strategy could transform even the most painful past into a hopeful present. The days that followed were different. The girls began to open up, cautiously at first, and then with a growing sense of trust that I had longed to see for years. The walls they had built around themselves, silent, steadfast, and protective, were beginning to crumble, brick by brick, under the gentle pressure of patience, understanding, and unwavering care. For the first time since our mission, I felt that the bond one had once hoped to forge in rubble and dust could be rebuilt in a world that seemed safer, yet just as challenging. We spent time together in the afternoons after school, in the quiet corners of the library, or under the shade of an old oak tree in the playground. At first, the conversations were short, tentative. "Do you remember that day?" one of them asked, her voice barely audible. My chest tightened. I nodded gently, letting the memory live in the quiet acknowledgement between us. They didn't need the details, the logistics, or the heroics. They needed recognition, a reminder that someone had cared enough to fight for them, then and now. As the trust grew, so did the stories they shared. The older girl spoke of foster homes, of teachers who tried but often failed to understand the weight she carried from her past. The younger one confessed to nightmares, the recurring echoes of explosions and chaos intruding into sleep, making her flinch at sudden sounds during the day. Each revelation cut deep, a reminder that the rescue mission had saved their bodies but not the invisible scars that trauma leaves behind. I felt a fierce protective surge, one that demanded more than empathy. It demanded action, attention, and emotional presence. We began revisiting their memories, not the frightening ones, but the small moments of courage, laughter, and defiance that had survived even in the darkest times. I reminded them of the way they had supported each other, how their laughter had defied fear, how tiny acts of bravery had saved not just themselves, but also others who had been trapped alongside them. I wanted them to see themselves not as victims, but as resilient, capable, and extraordinary, shaped not only by hardship but by their strength to endure it. One afternoon, the younger girl laughed, a pure, unguarded sound that I remembered from that day years ago in the rubble. It was fragile, tentative, and fleeting, but it was there, a bridge between past and present. I saw the older girl glance at her, her own lips curling into a small, almost hesitant smile. It was a breakthrough. The laughter was a declaration. We are here, we survived, and we are not broken. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, a mixture of relief, joy, and a profound sense of purpose fulfilled. Our sessions grew longer, more intimate. I shared stories of their resilience, gently drawing connections between who they were then and who they could become now. We practiced coping strategies for anxiety, ways to assert themselves when confronted with cruelty, and methods to recognize their worth when the world seemed to tell them otherwise. I watched as they began to embody these lessons, as the subtle posture changes, the fleeting confidence, and the willingness to express themselves became visible in their everyday interactions. And then came the moment that confirmed everything, the day they stood up for each other in the cafeteria. A group of children began mocking the younger girl, but this time, the older one intervened, firmly and calmly. I watched from a distance, heart pounding, as the power dynamics shifted subtly but unmistakably. The girls were no longer helpless. They were empowered. Their voices, once quiet and uncertain, carried authority and courage. And I realized in that moment that our shared mission, the one that began in chaos, was reaching its next phase. Healing, empowerment, and reclamation. Our connection deepened beyond words. They trusted me not only as a protector but as a confidant, someone who understood the shadows of their past and the fragility of their present. In their laughter, their tentative smiles, and their cautious boldness, I saw glimpses of the girls I had rescued years ago, but now stronger, wiser, and more resilient. They were learning to navigate the world with confidence, carrying the lessons of survival into a future that was theirs to shape. And yet, amidst this joy, I remained acutely aware of the responsibility I bore. The world could still be cruel, setbacks could still occur, and trauma could resurface unexpectedly. My role had shifted from immediate protector to guide, mentor, and steadfast presence. But this was no less important. The stakes were no longer life or death in the literal sense. They were life or death for the spirit, for confidence, for the ability to trust, to hope, and to thrive. There were moments of struggle, of course. The older girl would retreat when anxiety surged. The younger one sometimes froze in social situations, as though the past had trapped her once again. Each time, I reminded myself of patience, of the power of consistency, and of the importance of presence. I was not their savior. I was their ally. I was not rewriting their past, but I was helping shape a future where they could be proud of who they were and who they were becoming. Over time, the transformation became undeniable. Teachers began commenting on their newfound confidence, peers noticed their assertiveness, and the girls themselves laughed more freely, argued more fairly, and interacted with courage. I watched, quietly proud, as the mission I had once believed ended in rubble was reborn in classrooms, playgrounds, and small acts of daily bravery. Our bond, forged in fear and survival, had evolved into something enduring. Trust, mentorship, and the quiet knowledge that no one would face the world alone again. At night, after our sessions, I reflected on the journey. From chaos to courage, from rubble to a library corner, the mission had evolved, but it had never truly ended. These girls, the ones I had once lifted from the brink of death, were now finding their footing in a world that could be cruel, yes, but also nurturing and full of possibility. And I, finally, could witness the fruits of my dedication, patience, and unwavering care. The connection we had rekindled was more than emotional. It was spiritual. It was a promise kept, a duty honored, and a bond that no time or circumstance could sever. And as I watched them sleep, safe and hopeful, I knew that the reckoning of the past had intensified into a healing, empowering presence that would shape the rest of their lives. The journey was far from over, but the path forward was clear. We were together now, ready to face whatever came next. The morning sun streamed through the classroom windows, warm and unassuming, yet it carried a promise that had been years in the making. I watched the two girls, now walking confidently down the school hallway, their heads held high, smiles bright and genuine. The fear, the trembling, the quiet hesitation that had once marked their every movement had been replaced with a poise I had only dared to imagine. It was the culmination of a journey that had begun amidst rubble and chaos, and now, finally, it had reached a moment of quiet triumph. I had been by their side through every step, watching, guiding, protecting, encouraging. From the playground confrontations to the library sessions where they learned to reclaim their voices, every moment had been a piece of a larger mission, not just to save lives, but to restore them. And now, in this ordinary yet extraordinary moment, I saw the fruits of that labor. They were thriving, resilient, and capable, and the weight of the past was beginning to give way to the possibilities of the future. It had not been easy. The path to this day had been filled with uncertainty, guilt, and frustration. I had relived every fear, every regret, every what-if that haunted a soldier's conscience. Could I have done more? Should I have been there sooner? And yet, those questions, heavy as they were, had fueled me to act with patience, strategy, and unwavering care. I had learned that heroism isn't always about dramatic rescues or battlefield victories. It is about persistence, empathy, and the courage to stand by someone long after danger has passed. The girls approached me after their last class, eyes bright with excitement, and without hesitation, they embraced me. It was a hug that carried years of unspoken trust, gratitude, and recognition. I held them tightly, feeling the strength in their small frames and marveling at how far they had come. In that embrace, I could feel the echo of the mission, the laughter in the rubble, the terror of the escape, all transformed into hope, courage, and resilience. Over the following weeks, I worked to solidify their support network. Teachers, counselors, and even a few trusted peers became allies, forming a safety net that would protect them from future harm. We celebrated their achievements, no matter how small, instilling confidence and reinforcing the belief that they were capable of shaping their own lives. Each step forward was a reminder that survival was not enough. Thriving, growing, and embracing joy was the ultimate victory. One afternoon, I sat with them beneath the oak tree in the playground, the same place where our bond had begun to heal. The girls laughed freely, sharing stories of school projects, friends, and little victories. The older one spoke of wanting to mentor younger students who might be struggling, while the younger one talked about trying out for a school play, a step that would have been unimaginable months ago. Their voices carried confidence, their eyes sparkled with curiosity, and their spirits radiated a quiet but undeniable strength. It was in that moment I realized the depth of the transformation. These girls, once huddled and trembling, had reclaimed not only their present but also the possibility of a future unshackled by fear. They were no longer defined by their past traumas or by the challenges they had endured. They were defined by resilience, courage, and the choices they made every day to step forward, to embrace life, and to trust again. And yet, the journey was not just theirs, it was mine as well. I had come full circle, from the chaos of a battlefield to the subtle complexities of everyday life. I had learned that protection is not always dramatic, that influence is often quiet, and that the greatest victories are measured in growth, healing, and the courage to live fully. The mission had evolved, but its essence remained unchanged: to serve, protect, and nurture those entrusted to me, no matter the terrain, the challenge, or the time that had passed. In the weeks that followed, we celebrated milestones, academic achievements, social successes, and moments of personal bravery. I watched as they learned to navigate conflicts with grace, assert themselves when necessary, and embrace friendships with confidence. The laughter that had once been fragile and fleeting now resonated boldly, unrestrained by fear. Each step forward was a reminder that life could be reclaimed, reshaped, and enriched, even after profound challenges. I often reflected on the contrast between the world we had left behind and the one we were creating together. From war zones to school hallways, from life-or-death rescues to emotional guidance, the mission had been a continuum of care, courage, and commitment. And in this world, where battles are fought quietly but fiercely, the girls had emerged victorious. Their resilience was not just a testament to their strength, but also to the enduring impact of dedication, love, and steadfast presence. The day of the school assembly arrived, a celebration of accomplishments and the culmination of a year filled with growth. I watched as the girls stepped onto the stage, confident and poised, receiving applause from classmates, teachers, and parents alike. Their eyes found mine in the audience, and in that silent exchange, I understood everything. The mission, the journey, the struggles, the triumphs. All of it had led to this moment, a moment of recognition, of empowerment, and of closure. As the crowd cheered, I felt a profound sense of peace. The girls had reclaimed their voices, their confidence, and their joy. They were no longer defined by fear or trauma, but by courage, resilience, and the choices they made to live fully. And I, once a soldier in the chaos of war, had found my own closure, not in medals or accolades, but in the transformation of the lives I had touched, nurtured, and protected. Walking home that day, hand in hand with the girls, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. From rubble and fear to laughter and hope, from uncertainty to empowerment, we had navigated a path that few could imagine. The future was no longer a threat, it was an opportunity, a blank canvas upon which the girls could paint their lives with courage, joy, and confidence. I smiled as they chatted excitedly, their voices bright with plans, dreams, and possibilities. For the first time in a decade, I felt that the mission was complete. Not because danger no longer existed, not because challenges had disappeared, but because the girls had found their strength, their voice, and their future. And in that, I had found mine as well. The past would always remain, a reminder of fear, of courage, and of survival. But the present and future were ours to shape, to nurture, and to celebrate. And as we walked together into the sunlight, laughter mingling with the warmth of a new day, I knew without doubt, this was the life they deserved, the life they had fought for, and the life we would continue to build together.